Obviously, we talked to a bunch of you guys afterwards, but it was a tough one to swallow, going on the road and not performing the way we would have liked to have performed. And we got outplayed. To be honest with you, that's just being real. We said that to our guys after the game. That especially when you go on the road, you've got to earn everything that you're going to get. And we didn't do a good enough job at that. I also reminded them and told them I've played worse games and found a way to win. So what's difficult about, when you get punched in the gut, what's difficult about actually losing is, can you be as constructive on yourself because you have some of those feelings of not obviously coming out on top and having a victory. So that's a challenge to us that we're hopefully going to embrace. I know us as coaching staff, me in particular, definitely going to embrace that. I'm in the same boat as these guys, right? That had a vision and the vision didn't pan out, and now you got to be able to go back, reevaluate those things, humble yourself, and then move forward. So there's some highlights. There's some good things, and we hammered away at that as well. If you would have told me on Friday as we took off and left and said, hey, this is going to be a battle, and it's going to come down to the last 6 minutes of the game. You're going to have the ball on the 50-yard line, down 2. Would you take it? I'd say, yeah. That's what we've trained for. That's where we want to be in a battle, and give us a chance to close a game out and find a way to win. And so as poor as we may have played, we still had that opportunity with maybe 6:30 to go in the game with the ball, with a chance to go ahead and maybe win a football game. And we kind of fell back into some of the things that we've talked about, not being able to finish. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from the entire game. And the game is humbling, and so we got humbled a bit in that way. But we're excited about moving forward because there is no time to rest and relax. The reality is you've got a 2-0 Georgia Southern team that knocked off Nebraska last year at home. So hopefully that is a great awareness to all of us. Kind of like you look around college football, it's just the realities behind it. If you don't come to play, you don't play your best, then there's an opportunity for everybody every week. And so it's a great challenge for us.
Luke, you mentioned after the game not winning the turnover battle. The defense has yet to force one early here. Is there anything you're noticing on film, and is that kind of random, or how do you get them to get the ball rolling in that?
No, a lot of times they come in bunches, and that's the kind of the unique thing. We're 0 on 2 games, and that's tough. That's tough to overcome a lot of those situations, right? I mean, you got to manufacture everything. You got to get every stop. There were some unique ones in the game. The ball snapped over his head, and it takes one hop back up to the quarterback. They drop the ball in the end zone. It takes one hop and right back up to the quarterback, and then they snap it over their head again, and it takes 3 or 4 hops and bounces right back up to the quarterback. It just happens, right? I mean, I tell the guys all the time, when you're on the road in particular, you got to make things happen. You can't just hope that ball bounces our way. But in some of those situations, I think it's quite unique. I think I showed the defense 3 of the first 8 plays of the game, we had an opportunity to have a takeaway. A ball being snapped over the head and the way it bounced. To Rico, I think, had an opportunity. He broke on a really good play out in the flat and didn't come down with it. And then actually on their first 3rd and long, we didn't realize they got a first down. The officials never said it. The guy on our sideline was saying first down, but they didn't actually give them a first down, so it ended up being 4th and 1. But on that play in particular, the back makes a cutback. The ball is sticking completely out to the side, and we come in from behind, which is usually where those things happen. And just by chance, we tackle him, but we don't get any piece of the ball. There's 3 in the first 8 plays that we got to find a way to make the thing bounce our way and make the ball come out.
Luke, now that you've had time to review it, did you think there was a consistent issue with the run blocking, not able to get that going, or is it just the fact that the score went that way and it was hard to get that established?
I think it started off that way a little bit. I think they did a really good job on the edges early on, and took some of that away from us, and then the score in the situation of what things were going, I think maybe dictated a little bit of that. And as we started to throw the ball a little bit better, I think it gets into what they're going to give a chance to give you. Not they're going to give you anything, but what's got a greater opportunity to make some plays. And I think that good and the bad, right? The good is that there's a lot of possibilities offensively. I mean, it's not just a one-man running game show. It's not just a one wide. I mean, there's a lot of ability to move the ball around from the slots to the outside guys to the tailbacks. Now we got to find a way to be able to manage it and make sure that we're still doing and getting our guys the opportunities to create and generate momentum in different ways. But I give them some credit for they did a really good job at shrinking the edges and making it very difficult to run. And but in some ways we got to do a better job at being a little bit more creative and finding other ways to get our guys into the mix.
Luke, you mentioned after the game that after those 2 forced fumbles on Tanner, the 2 sacks, that the line did a much better job. But it's just from a schematic point of view, if with a team that uses multiple tight ends, if they want to max protect, they can keep a tight end under a back. For this offense, what's the schematic answer? If you've got a tackle that maybe has a really tough battle and maybe is losing that battle a little bit.
We can add the tight end into the mix. There's no doubt. We can add the back into the mix. And I think, you go in with a game plan and we went in with a game plan, and I don't know that we were saying that we were going to help anyone in particular. But you got to be able to adjust and adapt. They're all within the system. There's plenty of ways of doing that, and maybe we'll be a little bit more apt to get to them a little quicker if that's the opportunity or that's what is happening. But as we settled down, we did a much better job, especially on the edges, at making sure that we're a little bit more secure. And I don't know that we changed. It's not like all of a sudden we went over and said we're going to start chipping or we're going to bring the tight end in. We just did a much better job, I think, later in the second half in particular.
Luke, I don't think we had a chance to ask you about this after the game, but there was a potential safety. You guys could have had a safety there. It was a really close call. Curious if you thought about calling a timeout? I know you'd already burned a timeout, but what's the process? Okay.
I don't know that it's truly a challengeable, which, it's not a challengeable play, just like illegal man downfield is not a challengeable play, which are 2 things that, should be pretty easy to evaluate and look at, but it's not a challengeable play. We got to continue to move forward. I'm not saying it's a judgment call, but there are some different visions or views of what it is. But that's a big play. That's another one of those things that we're talking about. It's not a turnover, but the difference in ball games is sometimes measured in inches. And call that 6-8 inches where the ball went down. It's really, really, really close.
Have you had a conversation with Braylon yet? He was only had a small handful of carries.
7
carries in the game. What were your conversations with him about that?
Just how he handles all those situations. I mean, kind of the good and the bad, right? We talked about this before the season started, and your ability to take what is there and what is given is what we've got to be able to go with. When hopefully, and you believe you've got some more, weapons than just, 2 tailbacks or what you're going to hang your hat on every single time, that when you do have those opportunities, you got to take advantage of them and say what it is. They did a good job at taking away the run and stopping the run and doing some things, especially on early, but we have some opportunities to get our guys on the edges with things, and we've got to take advantage of those for him as well. And I think he understands that. He definitely understands that. We also know that we got to find more ways to create energy through the running game, whether it's with Braylon or with Ches. But I think that these are the things you got to go hand in hand with, right? I mean, it's not the same as it has been, and I think that's where we've all got to recognize that. I'm not saying it's right or it's better or whatever it is, but there's a flow to things. And I think he's mature. He understands that. He's disappointed. He obviously wants to touch the ball a lot more, and feels like more than just selfishly feels like he can be more of an impact. And I agree with him. He can be more of an impact, but the opportunities that we get, we've all got to take advantage of.
Luke, you've talked about championship aspirations. After a loss like this, how do you bridge the gap between reality and
I don't talk about
expectations?
those things a whole lot. We say that one time at the beginning of the year that we have an objective and a goal, and we try to say we don't worry about the destination. So it's a lot about being focused,
But maybe on the high expectations, how do you bridge the gap between reality and how those expectations are in the locker room?
Know if the reality of anything is taken away. That's kind of why we always try to say our objective is to play for a championship. You have everything still sitting right out in front of you. And to me, that's what's important. And hopefully that, like I said, it's humbling when you get punched in the gut, when you get knocked down. And In this instance, you have a loss, but it's also a realization that, we've got to continue to move forward. And I hope that it allows us to focus on the journey and what you need to do to get better as opposed to the destination. Regardless, I'm not saying anybody was focused on the destination, me included, but it is a great shot of reality about what it is that you got to focus on each and every week and quit worrying about, the things that could possibly happen at the end of the year.
The offense has had moments where it's really clicked. The third quarter had a couple touchdowns. There's always going to be ups and downs throughout the course of the game. But at this point, how close do you feel like the offense is to consistently playing at the level that you and Phil believe is possible?
I do think we're close. I think that there's some still balance of some things that we've got to do a better job of. But I think what it comes down to is the belief. And that's where you're getting everybody to say, making sure it's harder to believe when you don't see as much, right? If you find a way to win, even though you don't play well, it's a little bit easier. So this is one of those situations where you got to recognize, you've got to, grow, and you've got to see what other things are out there. And I think for us, this is going to be a big step. Being able to be humbled enough to recognize there's some really good things, but not be like selfish enough to think, well, if it would have been different, if I had got the ball, or if we'd have run the ball, or, in the same way I don't want Ches to everything. Well, if I wouldn't have, no, it's not what if. This is done together, and ultimately we didn't play complimentary football. Whether it was with 5.5 minutes left when they got the ball up 2, we got to find a way to, on both sides of the ball to get us another opportunity to win a football game. So I believe we're close, but it's not just going to happen. I think that's probably the biggest thing. I could sit up here every week and say, we're close. The reality is that just like turnovers and things like that, they don't just happen. You've got to make them happen. And I think that's where we've got to get ourselves back to understanding that there's a lot of things we have to do to make this happen.
Luke, when going back to the defensive turnovers or lack thereof, when you're so close yet so far away, kind of attitude like just a ball bouncing kind of thing, what's the message to the guys in terms of we're close?
Very simple. Don't panic. Keep your poise, And I think that's probably obviously what we didn't do a great job of in the first half is just having the poise to, handle some of the tempo and different things like that. But it's the same way with turnovers. All of a sudden you feel like we got to get turnovers. So now we're like looking for the ball and we're staring at the ball and we're not doing the things that we're supposed to do. That's why as a coach, you can't overemphasize them, right? We set standards and the things we do to start the season. We continue to stick with them, and you just got to tell them, you got to have confidence that they're going to come, right? I mean, there's little fundamental things we got to do better. But when they're there, when the ball goes on the ground, now we got to make sure we're in a position to capitalize, and that has a lot to do with just the effort and the attitude that I think we've got. We just haven't found a way to get those things in our favor, whether it's knocking it loose or hoping. We're not going to hope it's going to bounce, but making it bounce our way.
You kind of touched on James Thompson almost got the safety. In general, when you look at the defensive line, how did you evaluate the unit and kind of what stood out to you against Washington State?
Well, I think in the first half we probably struggled a little bit in some of the 3-man pressure stuff, but I thought those guys really, for the most part, ended up doing a really good job. We kind of went into the game on both sides of the ball saying we had to dominate the edges, and I'd say in the first half we did not do that on either side of the ball, and so whether that's offensively or defensively, but as a whole, as the thing went on, the good thing about it, I think there's 8 guys that played up front defensively. Nobody played more than 41 snaps, I think. So we're setting the standard of the effort level that you got to play with, and you got to recognize that if you're only going to play that many snaps, that you got to take advantage of every single one of them with your effort. So I think we're in a good place. I think we got to continue to grow. I think we've got to become a little bit more dominant, especially on the edges, and that's what our expectation will be.
Luke, I think it was before the opener, you said you weren't sure about Isaiah Mullins, about how long he might be out, or when. Do you have any update on him, and when he does come back, what do you think he can give that unit, especially on the edge?
Well, he'll have to earn a lot of those things, just in the sense that, there's a lot of guys that are rolling in there, and as we continue to push forward, it's similar on both sides of the ball, right? I mean, the more opportunities that you take advantage of, the harder you play, the things that end up happening. there'll be more. So we're excited to get him back. I don't know when exactly it will be. You know, it's Monday. It'd be great if we get him this week. I don't know if that's the case. I hope, but we'll have to see come Tuesday, Wednesday. Because if you can't go on Tuesday and Wednesday, then you're not going to be able to go on Saturday. And so those guys are doing a good job. And it'd be great to get him in the mix as well.
Coach, Ches isn't a guy that puts the football on the ground very much. I think that was the first lost fumble in his career, if I'm not mistaken. That kind of thing in that moment can affect people in different ways. How did you just kind of see him react after that and, coming back into the facility today? Well,
he was crushed after the game, and it's not one play. That's what we remind everybody all the time. But it is hard. A guy that has that much pride, has that much, has worked that hard, and he knows that the opportunities are not just like you're going to line up and get the ball 35 times. They've got a great duo of guys. So it makes it even more difficult. But I think everybody's got the utmost confidence in him, and that's what he's got to have in himself. And we had a little conversation after practice because I still think he was hanging on to it, which is something you can't do, regardless of what the situation, after 10, 12, 15 hours. Some would say 24. I think that's too long. You got to move on. You got to put it past you. But you got to remember the feeling. So those feelings are what continue to motivate you. You don't let them hold you back, And so I fully expect him to not bat an eye over it. But I can tell you that he took it really hard. But you saw the kind of maturity that his teammates have, that the trust they have in him.
So, Luke, I asked you about Bryson Green after the game, but just rewatching that film, just what skill sets stand out to make him a threat and stretch the field like he did in that second half?
I think he is. I think he's a big physical guy that is kind of coming into his own. We didn't have him at all in spring ball. We didn't have him in the winter. He was allowed to start working out more so in the summer and even catching balls because, he was coming off a surgery that we were pretty cautious on and not trying to push it too fast. So he is getting into stride. I think him and Tanner are obviously developing a connection as well, and he's going to be a guy that we're going to count on. He's a big, strong, physical guy. It's not just a, deep ball threat, but a guy that, can block on the perimeter really, really well. And I hope and believe can pretty much run everything that we need him to run, whether it's intermediate routes, whether it's a crossing routes, and as we've seen, here recently, some of the deeper balls as well.
Luke, it seemed like after a couple tough series to start the game, Kamoy didn't get back into the game. What was that? What went into that decision? What was he like on the sideline?
He did a good job. He did a good job at handling that. I think that emotions got a little bit of the best of him, and maybe the tempo. And I think after I'm not sure if it was 20 plays or 18 plays that we made a little bit of adjustment, switched up in some situations. But it's similar. It's similar to what happened with Ches. He can't hang his head. He's got to continue to move. We need him. We're gonna have to find ways to continue to use him. But I think for us moving forward, we've got to find ways to kind of figure out what our personnel is going to be, whether that's offense or defense. And the realities is each and every week you've got to perform. And I don't just mean on Saturday. I mean on the way you handle yourself on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I think that's one of the bigger lessons that I'm not saying how it was in the past, but like all of our guys got to understand that Tuesday and Wednesday are going to be really big days. And if we've created a competition within all these rooms, then Tuesday, Wednesday is still a part of an evaluation period. And so he'll go back out there on Tuesday and, work at it again and find ways to continue to get better. And I think it's just the little things, emotional things that he's got to continue to do a good job with.
I was going to ask about Kamoy, but his replacement, Preston Zachman, how do you think he played? And also, where's Jake Renfro in his recovery?
So Jake, I don't know. Hopefully, kind of like Isaiah, maybe he's a guy that we could get back this week or the following week. I still don't know yet. It'd be nice to see on Tuesday. And then Preston did a good job. I think he came in. He's kind of calmed down, settled it down in the midst of the pace that they were going with on the road. We just needed somebody to be in there to be a little bit more settling. And he hadn't played the position pretty much all week. He plays a lot more of the with Hunter and a lot of the positions that he plays. And just in the midst of the game, we had to kind of throw him in there and settle some things down. And he didn't bat an eye at it. He played with confidence. There's some things that playing over there that we'll have to work with him a little bit more on. But I thought he did a really good job.
Luke, you seem pretty pleased about Tanner Mordecai's performance on Saturday night. I know you like to watch the film. Did the rewatch match your initial
I don't know that I said I was pleased with anything after the game, but I do. I do think that he's in command. I loved his energy on the field. When it came down to it, you saw that competitive spirit, whether it was in the second half, having to pull some things down. I think he's doing a really good job. I think that, he gives us some options, but the quarterback is still evaluated on how everybody plays around him. And I think that's the uniqueness of that multiplier position. And where I think he's in a good place, I think he's, being a great example of a lot of things. I still think that he knows that, it's going to depend on how all those guys play around him and how he kind of gets everybody involved and makes everybody around him better.
Luke, you haven't lost back-to-back regular season games since 2017. What is your message that gets guys to flip the script?
It's not something I've think about, but I don't know that there's any one in particular thing, right? I mean, the first starts with humbling yourself, I think, more than anything. And if you can do that, then you got an opportunity to continue to grow. The most difficult thing about overcoming a loss is, getting out of your own head. Whether you're a coach or you're a player, the more you get in your own head, the more you keep going back over and over and over and trying to find excuses and reasons why things happened, the less chance you have of moving forward. So hopefully we can be an example to what that looks like, not talking about, well, what if the ball would have bounced, or what if they wouldn't have called that a fumble, or what if they would have, that's not going to do us any good. So I hope and believe that we can be an example, me in particular, of what humbling yourself looks like and what moving forward has to look like.
Luke, Braylon Allen has 13 catches through his first 2 games. I know you've preached giving what the defense takes you, but did you envision that much volume to the running backs in the passing game?
I don't know when we first started, but through fall camp and things like that, I did. I started to see it, and that's where I think we've got to, take advantage of some of those situations, that it's not always going to be handoffs, and Braylon, and Phil and everybody has talked about that. And I think that's one of those areas where we can get a lot better. And I think that's not ever being a running back, not being athletic enough to be a running back by any means. Maybe 5th, 6th grade, I was a fullback there for a couple weeks or something. I don't know how much different it is, as you're getting the ball way out in space with different angles of things like that. But I think that's an area where offensively we've got to and will become a lot better.
Luke, back to your running game a little bit. You mentioned what Washington State did, especially on the edges. Did their safety 25 make some plays against you? Sometimes there's an unblocked guy.
Yeah,
you just can't account for. Is that what he did? Is that one example of that?
I think in the very first play of the game, he did a really good job, obviously, as a middle of the field safety coming down and making the play on Braylon for maybe a 3 or 4 yard gain. And that's why I say you got to give him some credit. There are some other times where they rolled the safety down and he's standing there unblocked, in the B gap, and we still get 4 and 5 yards because it's not the easiest thing too. So I think sometimes we can, get a little bit overdone. At some point in time, there are some situations where you just got to say, hey, we're going to give you a one-on-one matchup, and we eventually got to win some of those things. And so I think it's a balance to that. They did a good job. They did drop in there, and I would tell you that if you asked them, their number one objective was to make sure they could stop the run. And it doesn't mean that we should abandon the run. We still got to find ways to be able to balance ourselves out. But that's how we get better.
Two kind of quick update ones. Riley Nowakowski, we saw him on the sideline in a boot. Is he any closer than?
I'm not very good with updates on injuries. I don't know. I don't expect that he is this week. I don't know or expect that he would be the following week, but I'm not ruling that out. And then I would hope and believe for sure that after that bye week.
Okay. And then other side note of that, Michael Mack, any update on his appeal yet?
Nope, haven't heard anything.